Snow was falling hard over the Montana plains, thick as silence and twice as cold. December had sunk its claws deep into the land, frosting the brittle grass and clinging to the wooden beams of the Stone River Ranch like old, settled sorrow. The wind screamed between the outbuildings, a feral, lonely sound that rattled loose shingles and stung any skin foolish enough to show itself. May walked straight into it. Her coat was too thin, patched at the elbows with a darker, rougher wool, and her gloves were mismatched, one wool, one worn leather. But her spine, visible even through the threadbare coat, was held ramrod straight. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, burned with a kind of fierce bank defiance that only women with nothing left to lose ever truly mastered. A small satchel, containing all she owned in the world, hung from her shoulder. Her boots, worn down at the heels, left sharp, determined prints across the frozen mud of the ranch yard. She stopped in front of the cookhouse, a long, low building from which a thin curl of smoke reluctantly escaped. A group of cowboys were gathered near the open fire pit just outside, passing a flask and laughing low, their breath pluming in the frigid air. They looked up as she approached, their laughter fading one by one as they took in the unlikely sight of her. A woman, alone, asking for something in a place that gave nothing easily. A tall man, older than the rest, with a graying beard and a suspicion etched so deep into the lines of his brow it looked like a brand, stepped forward. His voice was gravel, wrapped in whiskey. "This here's a working ranch, miss, not a place for strays or stories." "I am not a stray," May replied, her voice steady and low, refusing to be carried away by the wind. "And I ain't here to tell stories." He looked her over, a slow, dismissive appraisal from her worn boots to her determined chin. "We ain't got use for trouble, or liars, or girls who think they can sweet-talk their way out of the cold." May's jaw set, a hard, sharp line in her pale face. "I ain't here to sweet-talk neither." Another man, thicker and meaner in the eyes, spat a brown stream of tobacco juice onto the clean white snow near her feet. "She looks like she come from a saloon kitchen," he sneered, "if not the back room." That brought a ripple of crude, knowing laughter from the others. The first man, the foreman, raised a hand to silence it. Though he didn't disagree, he stepped forward until they were nearly nose to nose, his size an unspoken threat. "Well, what do you want?" May met his hostile stare without blinking. "I can cook," she said, her voice like flint striking steel. "I've worked cast iron over an open fire, skinned game in a blizzard, made sourdough rise in a snowstorm, and soup out of little more than bones and hope. I can feed your men with what's left in the barrel and make 'em say thank you after." There was a pause, the fire cracking and hissing behind them. "Where you come from?" the foreman asked, his eyes narrowing. May didn't answer. A shadow of a memory, sharp and painful, crossed her face before she locked it away. He leaned in closer, his voice a low growl. "This ain't no place for secrets, girl." She lifted her chin, the wind whipping a stray strand of dark hair across her cheek. "I know how to cook, and I'm not turning back." The foreman studied her for a long, tense moment, then he stepped aside and nodded his gray head toward the dark, unwelcoming door of the cookhouse. "We got 3 dozen men to get through the winter and no proper meals in 2 days. The stove's in there. You want the job? Prove it by morning." May didn't flinch. She didn't offer a smile of gratitude. "I'll need flour, salt, a dry towel," she said, her tone all business. "And a little respect wouldn't kill you," he grunted, a sound that was half a laugh. "We'll see about that last part." As May stepped toward the door, her eyes passed over the group of cowboys again. Most looked away, some smirked, others scowled, but one man didn't move at all. He leaned against a support post of the barn, his arms folded, a tall, silent figure in a dark, heavy coat, his brimmed hat pulled low. The only thing visible in the deep shadow was the sharp, clean cut of his jaw and the flicker of something unreadable, something intense in his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't scoff like the others. He just watched. May's gaze met his for a moment that felt too long, a silent, charged exchange, before she pushed open the heavy cookhouse door and stepped into the cold, dark interior. Inside, it was dark, colder than outside, and smelled of old grease gone sour. Rusted pots hung from the sideboards, and a few empty tins lay scattered on the floor like fallen soldiers. But the great cast-iron stove stood tall and black in the corner, a promise of warmth and purpose. May felt something like stubborn hope stir in her chest. She hung her satchel on a hook, rolled up her sleeves, and began to work. Outside, the man in the dark coat, Caleb Stone, kept his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the closed cookhouse door. He had known her face before she even spoke. He had seen her once, a year ago, in Billings, back when his world had still made a kind of terrible sense. He had been working a case then, a Pinkerton investigator trying to untangle the criminal web of a man named Silas Blackwood. He had seen her in the kitchens of the Rose Bell Saloon, Blackwood's glittering, rotten palace, the place where decent men whispered their lies and left their honor at the door. He remembered the night clearly, a memory that had burned itself into his conscience. She had been dragged into the main room, accused of stealing a drink, or maybe just of standing too tall, of looking a man in the eye without fear. A man twice her size had grabbed her by the wrist. She had not screamed. She had not cried. She had just stood there, her spine like iron, her eyes full of a fire that dared them to strike her down if they meant to. He, Caleb, had watched from the shadows, a witness, his duty warring with his instinct. And he had done nothing. He had chosen silence. He had chosen the long game, the investigation, over the immediate, righteous act. A week later, her younger sister, his informant, was found dead in an alley. The case had collapsed, and Caleb, haunted and disgraced, had retreated here to his family's ranch to hide under the guise of a simple cowboy. And now she was here, snow in her hair and the same untamed defiance in every step. He said nothing. He just turned and walked back toward the bunkhouse, the firelight flickering behind him, his heart a cold, heavy knot in his chest. A storm was coming, both outside and in, and it had her name. That night, a tense, unspoken history settled over the Stone River Ranch. Caleb kept his distance, his silence now born not of a reclusive nature, but of a deep and profound guilt. He saw her moving in the cookhouse, a silhouette against the firelight, and every movement was a reproach. May, in turn, kept to her own world. Her silence was a shield, forged in a lifetime of fear and distrust. She saw him among the other cowboys, this quiet, watchful man, and saw just another one of them, another man who had stood by and done nothing while the world tried to tear a woman down. He was a ghost from a past she was desperately trying to outrun. But her most precious, most dangerous possession was a small leather-bound cookbook, its cover worn soft with use. It had been her mother's, then hers, and finally it had been her sister Lily's. She kept it clutched to her like a holy relic, wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of her satchel. Caleb, from a distance, saw the familiar shape of the book as she unpacked her meager belongings, and a jolt of raw, physical pain went through him. It was the same book his informant Lily had described to him in a hushed, terrified whisper. The book that held the evidence, the book that had gotten her killed. He couldn't bear it, the silence, the suspicion, the weight of the past pressing down on them both. That night, after the other cowboys had retired to the bunkhouse, he walked to the cookhouse. The light was still on. He pushed the door open without knocking. She was sitting at the small table, the cookbook open in front of her, her finger tracing a recipe. She looked up, startled, her hand flying to cover the page. "Where did you come from?" he asked, his voice rough, skipping the pleasantries. "Why are you here?" Her eyes narrowed, the fire returning to them. "That's none of your business. I was hired to cook, not to answer to you." "Everything that happens on this ranch is my business," he countered, stepping further into the room. "You're just one of the hands," she shot back, her voice laced with a scorn she had earned the right to feel. "You have no say." "Don't I?" he said, his voice dropping, the sound a low, dangerous rumble. He watched as her hand tightened on the book, her knuckles white. He knew he was pushing her, frightening her, but he had to know. He was torn between his duty to the past, the promise he had made to a dead girl, and the raw, instinctual fear of reopening a wound that he knew could destroy them both. He was an investigator again, whether he wanted to be or not, and the most important witness of his life was standing right in front of him, looking at him as if he were the devil himself. A fragile, unspoken truce settled over the Stone River Ranch in the days that followed their tense, moonlit confrontation. It was a truce born not of understanding, but of a shared, wary respect for hard work. Caleb, wrestling with the ghost of his past, retreated back into his carefully constructed shell of a simple cowboy. He kept his distance, his silence now a heavy cloak of guilt and unresolved duty. He performed his chores with a grim, relentless efficiency, his axe strokes falling harder, his ropes pulled tighter, as if he could physically work the torment out of his soul. But his eyes were always drawn to the cookhouse, to the steady curl of smoke from its chimney, to the silhouette of the woman who was a living embodiment of his greatest failure. May, in turn, fortified her own walls. Her silence was a shield, a defense mechanism perfected over a lifetime of distrust. She treated Caleb with a cool, professional detachment, seeing him as just another mouth to feed, another man whose motives were suspect. Yet beneath the surface of their mutual avoidance, a quiet, unspoken dialogue began to take shape. It was a conversation held in actions, not words. When she saw him struggling to mend a particularly stubborn piece of tack, his hands clumsy with a needle and thread, she would find it the next morning, perfectly stitched, laid neatly on the anvil in the smithy. When a late-season storm blew in, rattling the cookhouse and sending icy drafts through the walls, he would appear silently in the night and nail a heavy woolen blanket over the poorly fitting door, disappearing before she could offer a word of thanks. He provided her with a constant, silent supply of the best firewood and the cleanest water. She, in turn, ensured a hot cup of coffee and a thick slice of bread were always waiting for him, no matter how early he rose. It was a strange, delicate dance of anonymous support, a respect forged in the shared language of relentless labor. The first crack in this fragile peace came not from within, but from without. A man named Red Callahan rode into the ranch one afternoon, his horse lathered, his face a mask of false bonhomie. He announced he was looking for work, a stray hand drifting between seasons. But Caleb knew him. Red was a hired enforcer, a man whose loyalty was sold to the highest bidder, and Caleb had last seen him guarding the back door of Silas Blackwood's Rosebell Saloon. His real mission was immediately, chillingly clear. He had been sent to confirm May's identity and to locate the cookbook. Red integrated himself with the other cowboys, his laughter too loud, his questions too casual. He began to seed the bunkhouse with poison, starting the slow, insidious process of turning the other men against May. He told stories laced with crude innuendo about her time at the Rosebell, painting her not as a cook, but as a woman of loose morals, a fallen dove. The sideways glances started again. The respectful silence she had earned was replaced by a familiar, ugly whispering. The men began to treat her as if she were contagious, leaving a wide space around her, their thanks for her food becoming a low, grudging mumble. They were isolating her, just as Red intended. The tension culminated one evening by the fire. Red, emboldened by whiskey and a captive audience, made a particularly vile remark, something about saloon leftovers not being fit to cook for decent men. Caleb, who had been sitting in the shadows, staring into the flames, moved. There was no warning, no raised voice. He simply rose, walked over to Red, and delivered a single, hard, fast punch that cracked against Red's jaw like a breaking bone. Red hit the ground hard, spitting blood and a curse. The other cowboys, stunned into silence, simply stared. Caleb stood over Red for a single heaving breath, his fists still clenched, his face a mask of cold, righteous fury. Then he turned and walked away into the darkness without a single word. The fight, as brutal and decisive as it was, changed nothing and everything. The next day, May found Caleb by the creek, skipping stones across the icy water. The violence of the previous night still hung between them. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet but demanding. "Why did you do that?" He didn't look at her. He had it coming. "That's not an answer," she pressed, stepping closer. "Men like you," she said, her voice laced with a lifetime of bitter experience, "don't fight for women like me, not unless you want something." Pushed to the edge, the weight of his guilt and his secrets finally becoming too much to bear, he turned to face her. The carefully constructed mask of the simple cowboy fell away, revealing the haunted, weary face of the investigator beneath. "I was there that night, in Billings," he said, his voice a low, raw confession. "I was the investigator. I was working the case against Blackwood. Lily, your sister, she was my informant. That book," he pointed a shaking finger towards the cookhouse, where he knew she kept it hidden. "That was supposed to be the evidence, the key to everything." His voice broke. "I failed her, May. I was too slow, too cautious. I told her to wait one more day, and that night they killed her. I failed her, and I failed you." The revelation was a bombshell that shattered the fragile world she had built around herself. Grief, fresh and sharp as a new wound, warred with a hot, surging anger. But through the storm of emotion, one thing became clear. His silence hadn't been judgment. It had been shame. It had been the same crushing guilt that she herself had carried, the guilt of a survivor. Now, finally understanding the ghost that haunted him, she made a choice. She would not let fear win again. "Come with me," she said, her voice now steady, imbued with a new, hard-won authority. She led him back to the cookhouse. She retrieved the small, leather-bound cookbook from its hiding place. She opened it not to a recipe for bread or biscuits, but to a page in the back, a page that looked like any other but was profoundly different. The recipe was titled simply, Rosemary Lamb Stew. My sister showed this to me before she... Before, May's voice faltered for a moment, then regained its strength. It's not a recipe, it's a cipher. Our mother taught it to us, a way to pass messages. Look. Together they bent over the page in the dim light of the cookhouse. One sprig of rosemary, May explained, her finger tracing the words, means the first name on the ledger. 2 pounds of lamb, shoulder cut. That's the account number. Simmer for 3 hours. The date of the transaction. It was all there. A meticulous, coded record of Blackwood's entire money laundering operation, a criminal enterprise built on extortion and blood, hidden in plain sight as a simple family recipe. The secret that had gotten her sister killed was finally, terribly, clear, and they were the only 2 people in the world who could read it. The revelation of the coded recipe hung in the cold air of the cookhouse, a truth as stark and dangerous as a loaded gun on the table. For May, it was the final, heartbreaking confirmation of her sister's courage, a legacy written in the secret language of their childhood. For Caleb, it was the key, the Rosetta Stone to the case that had shattered his life. The shame that had kept him silent for so long was burned away, replaced by the cold, clear focus of the investigator he once was. But with this clarity came the chilling realization of their immediate mortal danger. They were no longer just a cook and a cowboy. They were the sole keepers of a secret that could destroy one of the most powerful men in the territory, and he knew they had it. Red Callahan, realizing his cover was blown and that Caleb was far more than a simple ranch hand, had slipped away in the chaos following their confrontation. He's gone to warn Blackwood, Caleb said, his voice a low, grim statement of fact. We don't have days, we have hours. The Stone River Ranch, once a refuge, was now a fortress under siege. They knew a direct escape was impossible. Blackwood's network was vast. Every road, every town would have eyes watching for them. Their only chance was to make a stand, to turn their sanctuary into a trap. The first person Caleb had to face was his own father. He found Mr. Stone in the main house, a proud, stubborn old man who had watched his son's return with a mixture of relief and quiet disappointment. Caleb laid it all out. His past as a Pinkerton, the failed case, the death of his informant, and the coded cookbook that now lay on the kitchen table. He confessed that his life as a simple cowboy had been a lie, a penance for his failure. The old man listened in silence, his weathered face unreadable in the firelight. When Caleb finished, Mr. Stone was quiet for a long, heavy moment. Then he rose, walked to a locked gun cabinet, and took out a heavy, well-oiled Sharps rifle. No son of mine is a coward, he said, his voice rough with an emotion Caleb hadn't heard in years. You were just fighting a war you didn't know how to win. Now you do. He looked past Caleb towards the cookhouse where May was preparing. And it looks like you finally found yourself a proper soldier to fight alongside. With the full, unwavering support of Caleb's father and the handful of loyal, seasoned ranch hands who had worked for the Stones for decades, the ranch transformed. It was no longer a place of quiet desperation, but of defiant preparation. But the climax of this story would not be a simple gunfight. It would be a battle of wits, a reckoning served on their own terms, and the architect of the final gambit was not the investigator, but the cook. Blackwood thinks he's a king in a palace, May said, her eyes gleaming with a fierce, strategic light as they planned late into the night. He's arrogant. He won't just send his men to die. He'll want to be there to see us break. He'll want the book in his own hands. She looked at Caleb. So we'll invite him to dinner. Their plan was audacious. They sent one of the younger ranch hands, a boy they could trust, to ride for the nearest town with a message. The boy was to let himself be caught by Blackwood's men and under duress reveal a fabricated story, that Caleb was just a broken man, May a terrified girl, and that they were willing to trade the cookbook for safe passage and a sum of money to be exchanged at the ranch at dawn. It was a lure that played directly into Blackwood's arrogance and his desire for control. As dawn broke, casting long skeletal shadows across the snow-covered yard, Blackwood arrived. He came as May had predicted, not with an army, but with a small, elite group of his most trusted enforcers, including the now-healed Red Callahan. He wanted to savor this victory personally. The final confrontation took place not in the open, but in the heart of May's domain. The cookhouse. The long wooden table was set as if for a meal. The air smelled of baking bread and roasting meat. May stood by the stove, her face pale but her hands steady. Caleb and his father stood near the hearth, their rifles out of sight but within easy reach. "An impressive spread, May," Blackwood said, stepping inside, his confidence absolute. "A last meal, perhaps?" He gestured for the cookbook, which sat innocently on the table. "The book, and our business is concluded." "First," May said, her voice clear and even, "you should know what's in the stew." She lifted the lid from the heavy cast-iron pot on the stove. The rich, savory aroma of rosemary lamb stew filled the room. Blackwood frowned, confused. "It's my sister's recipe," May said, her eyes locking with his, the fire of her long-held grief now a blazing inferno. "The one she was perfecting before your man put a knife in her back. She said it was missing just one secret ingredient." In that moment, the seemingly peaceful scene exploded into calculated chaos. May, in a single fluid motion, grabbed a large bag of flour from the counter and hurled it into the open fire of the stove. The fine powder ignited instantly, creating a massive, disorienting flashbang that filled the small cookhouse with a blinding white light and a deafening roar. Blackwood's men, momentarily blinded and deafened, staggered back. In that same instant, Caleb and his father brought their rifles to bear. But the true battle was May's. As Blackwood, coughing and rubbing his eyes, reached for his own weapon, May moved. She didn't grab a gun. She grabbed the heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove, its surface still searing hot, and swung it with all her might. The sound of hot iron connecting with bone was sickeningly final. Blackwood crumpled to the ground. His reign of terror ended not by a bullet, but by the simple, brutal tool of a cook's trade. The fight was short and decisive. Caleb and the ranch hands, using the chaos May had created, subdued the remaining enforcers. The story ends months later, as the spring thaw brings new life to the Montana plains. Silas Blackwood and his network are in a federal prison, brought down by the coded evidence in a simple cookbook. The Stone River Ranch is peaceful, and in the nearby town, a new establishment has opened its doors, a small, clean, and welcoming diner named the Rosemary Ledger. Inside, May stands behind the counter, a clean white apron tied around her waist, her laughter now easy and frequent. Caleb sits at one of the tables, a cup of coffee in his hands, helping his father go over the ranch's real ledgers. He is no longer an investigator hiding in the shadows, and she is no longer a fugitive running from them. The final scene shows May bringing a bowl of her now famous stew to Caleb. He looks up at her, his eyes full of a love and respect that is quiet but absolute. "I never thought I'd earn redemption," he says, his voice soft. She smiles, a real brilliant smile that lights up the entire room. "Redemption isn't earned, Caleb," she replies, placing a hand on his. "It's cooked slow with all the right ingredients." They are not just survivors. They are partners, having served a cold, long overdue reckoning, a reckoning that tasted, in the end, remarkably like justice. The Cook's Ledger is a powerful story that serves as a profound reminder that our greatest strengths are often forged in the very fires meant to destroy us. May was a woman defined by her role as a cook, a position often seen as humble and subservient. Yet her kitchen became her fortress, her recipes her language, and her simple cast-iron tools her weapons. Her journey teaches us that power doesn't always come from a gun or a badge. True power lies in mastering your own domain, whatever that may be, and having the courage to use your unique skills to fight for what is right. The world saw her as just a cook. She proved that a cook could be a strategist, a warrior, and an agent of justice. Caleb's story, on the other hand, is a deeply resonant exploration of guilt and redemption. He was a man haunted by a moment of inaction, a professional failure that he allowed to define his entire identity. He hid himself away, believing he was no better than the cowards he despised. He carried his guilt like a physical weight, a constant internal monologue of shame. What finally breaks him free is not a grand act of heroism, but a simple choice: to act. The moment he punches Red Callahan, he is no longer just a passive observer of injustice. He is an active participant in the fight against it. Their partnership is the heart of the story. They were two people paralyzed by the past, he by the guilt of what he didn't do, she by the fear of what was done to her. Separately, they were stuck, but together they became something more. He provided the strength and the tactical mind, but she provided the strategy, the courage, and the moral clarity. She didn't need him to save her in the end. She needed him to stand with her so she could save herself. This is a powerful lesson for our own lives. We often wait for a hero to come along, for someone else to fight our battles. But the Cook's Ledger suggests that the most powerful alliances are not between a savior and a victim, but between two capable partners who empower each other. It reminds us that redemption isn't a gift that's given to you. It's a choice you make, often in the heat of the kitchen, with the simple tools you have at hand. And it proves that justice, like the best cooked meals, is a dish best served when you finally have the courage to turn up the heat. And so, in a cookhouse that became a courthouse, a haunted investigator and a defiant cook served up a reckoning that was long overdue. They discovered that the sharpest weapon against evil is not always a bullet, but the burning, righteous fire of a spirit that refuses to be extinguished. Thank you for joining us for this serving of justice here at Wild West Secrets. If this story of hidden courage, unexpected heroes, and a conspiracy hidden in a simple recipe resonated with you, then you found your table with us. We are committed to telling the stories of those who fight their battles not just in dusty streets, but in the quiet, forgotten corners of the frontier. To help us keep the fire lit, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who knows that the kitchen can be the heart of the home, and sometimes the heart of the fight. And if you never want to miss another secret on the menu, be sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Now it's your turn to add an ingredient. Leave a comment below and tell us, what do you think was more powerful, Caleb's punch or May's skillet? Until our next story, may you always know your own worth, and may you never underestimate the power of a woman in her own kitchen. Stay safe out on the trail.